All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the easiest editing mistakes that you can avoid. So one of the most important and easiest things that you can do to make sure that your photos look good is to actually sharpen your images. I still see a lot of people not sharpening their images, and it's probably one of the most important things that you can do to actually make things look final and complete. So here we have this image from this property, and here it is without being sharpened, and here it is being sharpened. So it doesn't matter how good the editing itself is, if the image hasn't been sharpened, it's going to look very soft, dull, and blurry, as you can see here. So when we sharpen it, it's going to look very crisp, it's going to look sharp, it's going to look final. Sharpening the images is really the last step that you do in the editing process, and yet it's still one of the most important, and it is the easiest things that you can do. It brings out details that you won't see otherwise, and it takes a soft, blurry image and really helps to finalize how it looks overall. And it's extremely important, and I still see a lot of people not sharpening their images. And here's another example. Here we have this front shot that has been sharpened. It's final, it's good, it's ready to go. And again, here it is after being edited without the sharpen pass applied to it. As you can see, it's completely soft, dull, boring, and lifeless without that sharpen pass. It's almost as if the image wasn't even edited. And then when we apply it, it looks excellent. Makes things look crisp. It brings out the contrast. As you can see, it's extremely important to sharpen your images, just to drive the point home about how soft and blurry and dull the image will look if you don't apply a sharpen pass to it. I recommend using a lab mode sharpen pass to run on all of your images once you are done editing them. It will help to bring out all the small details and help to finalize the image as a whole. So that is one of the most important and easiest things that you can do to make your images look good. Another thing that you can do to help bring out the quality of your images is to clean up all the small details. And what I mean by that is small details such as things that don't really matter that can be easily removed, such as outlets, electrical covers, things like that. So here we have this image and it looks decent overall, but if we just use simple tools like the Content Aware tool to take a minute or so and just remove these things, it will really go a long way to help clean the image up and to make it much more appealing to the eye overall. If you can take 1 or 2 minutes and clean things up, it's going to go a long way. It's going to go a long way, and I understand that, homes need to have electrical outlets and things like that. But if it's not absolutely crucial to the image and it's actually making the image look worse, I always recommend just removing those things. I understand that they're there in reality, they're there at the home, but I've never had an agent or anybody ask, where are the outlets, light switches, things like that. So once we remove those things, then we can really focus on the property itself. We can focus on the woods, the materials used, the architecture itself. It's just a cleaner image overall, and removing these things will go a long way to helping your images stand out. Here's another example. If we just took some time to remove things like this crane, and again, these things are just so simple. It requires no thought at all. It requires really no effort when it comes to removing these things, and it's just going to go a long way. These are decent images, but as soon as I see them, my eye immediately goes to the outlets and things like that. But once they're removed, I can actually focus on the image as a whole because it just looks so much cleaner. If it's not going to take that much time, just come in there and remove these things because they don't make the image look better. They're actually making the image look worse, and they're taking focus away from the property itself, right? We should be able to focus on the furniture and the interiors, the outside view, things like that. If you have time, just remove all the outlets, remove cords, wires, things like that. I guarantee you the agents will see these things and they will really appreciate the extra work that has gone into it as far as the editing. You'll make them happy, the image is going to look better, and you'll maintain them as a client. Everybody wins. Again, it all comes down to how much time you have So if it's going to absolutely kill you, then, I don't recommend doing it. But if you do have the time, always remove these things because it just looks so much cleaner without these things really filling up the area, filling up the room, and just taking away attention from the interiors themselves, Especially when it comes to things like power lines, always remove those. They don't look good. If the agent didn't specifically ask for those to be removed, I guarantee you they will regret that and they will wish that they had made a request to have it removed. So just do it. Just get in the habit of removing these things because, again, it's just going to clean the image up. And now we can just focus on the image itself. It's very simple. Just think about things that can be cleaned up in the image. What can you do? What can you remove? What can you add to it? If there are light bulbs that are out, just come in there and see if you can't basically copy and paste existing pieces of the image into another area. You don't have to go all out and make things absolutely perfect, but just doing something like that will go a long way. That's going to go a long way. And if it's in the reflection itself or something like that, make sure that you're coming in there and replacing it over there as well. These are really small things that don't take a lot of time, but they go a long way, especially with things like that where a light bulb is out. Here's another example where we should really just be focusing on the room itself, the interior and things like that. But as soon as I see this image, my focus quickly goes to the left and it sees all this cluttered stuff on the wall over here. And I can't really focus on the interior. So just coming in there with a basic tool like the spot healing brush or, the patch tool, whatever you prefer. These content aware tools, they're very simple, but they can do good jobs when it comes to simple edits and things like that. So once these things are removed, then I can finally focus on the image itself, and that's really how it should be. I say it all throughout the video, you should be able to focus on the interior and what highlights the room itself and the property itself. Always remove pool cleaners and things like that. Make the pool look clean. Again, I understand that there is a light here, for nighttime and things like that, but it's daytime and we're not really getting the benefit of having this lit up. So I would just remove it and just try to make the image look cleaner. And of course, always remove your photographers and things like that. So these small details can really go a long way, and I guarantee you the agents will appreciate it and your work will look much better overall. Another mistake that's very easy to avoid is using the flash improperly. This is an absolute joke and it really needs to stop because I still see this kind of stuff all over the place and it looks absolutely terrible. It looks terrible when you have a flash beaming into the ceiling up here. It's really unacceptable. People really need to take more effort in brushing these things out or just removing them completely by using their masks properly, things like that. Don't leave flashes in the reflection. It looks really bad when the entire image is bathing in this glow from the flash, beaming off the ceiling, creating these harsh shadows right here, like with the flowers, the vase. You can see it with the kitchen sink. You can see it with the toilet itself, things like that. Always try to remove the lens flares that we get, all these artifacts, things like that. And always make sure that you're using the flash properly, because I still see this all the time and it's completely unacceptable. It's very, very unprofessional. It shows a lack of editing skills and a complete lack of what actually looks good. No agent wants this. No real estate agent wants to have their images look like this. It's absolutely atrocious and it needs to stop. And just make sure that you're actually using the flash for its intended purpose, which is really just to take down the overexposed areas of the windows themselves. Never leave the reflection of the flash there. Always make sure that you're brushing out those harsh shadows, things like that. These are very, very easy things to avoid, but I see them, It's almost as if people are doing them on purpose. I don't understand it because it's happening so much. Always remove your photographers from the reflections, things like that. Again, it's really just to take down the overexposed areas. You don't want to use the flash as your base image. You're always going to get those harsh shadows. The image is going to be bathing in that illuminated flash. Doesn't look good. And when you do brush in the flash, make sure that you're not brushing it into the edges of the top, right, left, and bottom corners, things like that. It's going to affect the edges of the bed, the edges of the shelves, things like that. Again, getting those harsh shadows. And make sure that you're taking down the brightness of those overexposed areas as well. Again, here is another example of the flash being used improperly. The image is bathing in that illuminated light from the flash. Doesn't look good. And we're getting those harsh shadows. We're getting the flash beaming off of the ceiling. Not only that, this person that edited the photo could have used the flash to take down these overexposed lamps here above the mirrors and things like that, which they did not do. And again, these are very easy mistakes that we can all avoid. So another mistake that's easy to avoid is feathering your mask either too much or too little. And what I mean by that is we have this image here and here's my mask, right? So usually when you bring in the mask, you've made your path selections using the pen tool, whatever tool you want to use. Typically, it's going to result in a very harsh and sharp edge from the mask itself, right? So what we do is, at least what I like to do is I like to just click on the mask, go into the properties of the mask itself, and just feather that by usually about 0.4 pixels, and that's typically enough to feather this mask, the edge of it, so that it's not harsh or razor sharp, right? So if we just leave it at 0, you can see how sharp the edge is, and we just want to get rid of that by feathering it a little bit. But what I see people do sometimes is that they will feather it so much that it basically becomes blurred, and that's not what you want. You don't want to have these look like they were painted in using a soft brush. You don't want it to look like that, right? You want it to look like it was professionally cut out and masked using the pen tool and things like that. You don't want to have that brushed in look, right? Sometimes people go overboard with how much they feather it. So you don't want it to be razor sharp, and you also don't want it to be blurred in and things like that. This is how the mask looks after it has been over feathered. And that's how it looks if it hasn't been feathered at all. Obviously you can see it's razor sharp, it's crisp. Just want to have it feathered just a little bit. Usually 0.4 is where I like to use it, where I like to do it. You can also use the blur tool. That's fine. If I do use the blur tool to feather the mask edge, I'll usually do it at around 15%. And you can just come in there and just like that and achieve the same result. But the problem with that is that it's pretty destructive in the fact that you can't come back and basically undo that. If you come in here and just click the mask, go under the mask properties, you can feather it as much as you want or as little as you want, and you'll always be able to come back in your layer stack and adjust that at a later point. Whereas if you use the blur tool, it's basically one and done, and you don't have the ability to come back and reduce that blur amount. It's kind of there unless you delete the mask and, go into your paths and reapply the mask. So I typically just use the properties in the mask properties itself and just feather it. And again, don't over feather it. The last thing you want is to put time and effort into creating your masks and your paths and things like that just to get a blurry look like that. It's not going to look good. It's going to result almost in some sort of HDR blending look, which does not look good. And obviously, if we over feather it, we're going to get tons of spillover into those unwanted areas. Eventually, it'll start to look like we're just painting in and brushing in, things like that. That's not what you want. You want things to be very, very precise and well put together. So always just pay attention to how much you're feathering the mask edges themselves. Another mistake that is quite easy to avoid is when you are tracing in your paths and things like that, making selections around windows. Make sure that you're not using the exterior view layer in your layer stack. Make sure that you're not brushing that in to the surrounding areas. So if we had our selections, things like that, make sure that you're just affecting those areas that you want to be affected inside those selections, and that you're not brushing in that layer into the other layers, because you're going to get spillover that doesn't look good, especially around the window frames. As we can see here, it's very light down here on the left and right hand side, but then when we move up, it starts to get darker, and that's because the person editing this probably was using a broad brush and was kind of painting this in a little bit. I'm not sure exactly what was happening here, but I still see it happen quite often because the editors, they aren't exactly sure what the best way is to go about bringing in all of the images and compositing them together. And another problem that I see a lot is when editors make their selections, they're just slicing right through objects that are in front of the window. This is a very important thing that people need to understand how to do properly. If we had, these two layers, let's say this black layer that I just filled in was the exterior shot that we want to fill in. So they're not actually coming in here and filling in these areas right here with this plant right here. They're just slicing right through it and they're excluding it from the mask itself. So you need to either include it or exclude it and learn what needs to be included or excluded, because you can't just have a mask slice right through this plant and then leave the middle out, because the plant here is dark on this side, it's dark on this side, but right here in the middle outside of that selection, it's going to be completely bright. It's not professional. That's a very easy mistake to avoid. So make sure that you're just filling in things that need to be filled in as you're doing your masking and your layers and things like that. And again, here is another example of somebody that was brushing in their exterior view. I'm not sure exactly what they were going for here, but it looks really, really bad, tremendously bad. It's white up here, it's white up here, it's dark and brown over here. It's very inconsistent. You can see that they really weren't coming in here with the pen tool and making precise selections or anything like that. They were just kind of brushing in their exterior shot with a soft brush, basically just brushing it in, things like that. It's not good, because it's not only going to result in that darkening around the window frames, around the door frames, things like that. It's not only going to spill over onto the edges of the couch and things like that. You're also not going to be getting a consistent result with how much you can see outside. So we can see that when we compare, let's say, this area right here versus this area right here. The area over here on the left, we can see it outside much more clearly, but since he was just brushing it in, he kind of neglected to do the same over here, and we don't get the same clarity or visibility as we do with these exterior views in the middle area. So again, brushing things in like that for your exterior views is never something that is going to look good. It's very easy to avoid. Just make sure that you're doing a good job when it comes to your path creation and overall masking and things like that. It looks like this person did a decent job with the masking and things like that, but for some reason we're still getting that spillover. We can see it right here. We can see it right here. It's light. It's light. It's light over here. And then it's dark, dark, dark up here. It's darker over here. Again, it's very inconsistent and it just looks bad. It's very easy to avoid. As I said a moment ago, just make sure that you're doing things properly with your masking and things like that. Make sure that you're taking the time needed to actually composite everything together. Editing architecture and real estate photography is very time consuming, and it's not for everyone, but it has to be done properly and professionally. And finally, the last editing mistake that's very easy to avoid is just to make sure that your images look consistent. Make sure that they all look like they were edited by one person. Make sure that they don't look like they were edited by multiple people. If it's one property, make sure that all of the images look identical. Make sure that the brightness is the same, the contrast. Make sure that the exterior views look the same, the colors, the white balance. They all really need to have the same characteristics overall. Again, you don't want it to look like it was edited by multiple people. I understand that making sure each room and area of the property looks the same, it's not always an easy task to accomplish, but it is something that has to be done. It's something that has to be done if you want things to look professional. What you want is to be able to knock it out of the park every time, make sure the agents are happy, and make sure that they don't come back with any complaints or anything negative to say about the images or the properties themselves. You want to make them happy. That way you can move on to the next job. the next job, and the next job after that, and just keep things rolling. So always make sure that your images are consistent and that they look identical as far as the characteristics go. So again, always make sure that you're sharpening your images, making sure that they're crisp and they're ready to be delivered to the agents. Make sure that they're not dull, resulting in an image that looks like it has not been edited. Just make sure that you're ticking off all the boxes of things that need to be done to the image before you send them out to the agents. Make sure you're taking the time needed to clean up all the small details and to make the property itself look as presentable as possible. Make sure that you're using the flash properly. Make sure that you're not beaming it off the ceiling, leaving it in the shots itself, and just make sure that you're using it properly, blending things together so that it's a well-balanced image. And make sure that you're not over-feathering or under-feathering the mask edge of your masks. Make sure that they're not too sharp or too blurry. Make sure that they are where they need to be. And make sure that you're doing a proper and precise job when it comes to creating your masks and your paths and things like that, and that you're not just brushing in your exterior views, resulting in a very, very inconsistent and bad looking image overall. And of course, always make your images as consistent as possible. All of these things covered throughout the video are very easy things that we can address and make sure that we're on top of. Make sure that we're not making small editing mistakes and that our images are as professional as they can be. That way we all win.